Let's talk Christian nationalism, and who better to educate us on Christian nationalism than a Christian?
This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
If you're a Christian and if you love your country, you're a Christian nationalist. This is Wretched Radio. These two words that are being bandied about lately sure seem to have been taking on a flavor that doesn't taste very good if you happen to be a Christian. It is a broadly defined term. It is everything from the people in the KKK, white supremacists, all the way to, it was kind of nice when we said a Pledge of Allegiance and sang America the Beautiful.
So, the first thing I'd have to ask here is, who is saying that people merely having the Pledge of Allegiance to America the Beautiful are being called Christian nationalists? Secondly, can we all take a moment to consider just the mere fact that the Pledge of Allegiance is creepy as hell? No, seriously, think about it. As a child, growing up in the United States, without having any context for the history of your country, or why you should care about it, or whether or not you're even aligned with its political values, we are indoctrinated to almost worship a flag. Just think about how creepy and cult-like that is. You're pledging allegiance to a country that you were merely born in. You have no affiliation with this aside from the geographical location that you happened to pop out of your mom's vagoo into. And yet, there's that. So I'm not going to say that all Christians who want to have want to do the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, I'm not going to call them all Christian nationalists. That's silly. But what I am going to say is, it's really creepy. Like, on its own, it's really creepy. Just, eh. So, Todd, tell us about this Christian nationalism.
Congratulations. If you are anywhere in that spectrum, you're a Christian nationalist, and that means you're dangerous.
Can you give an example of somebody who's saying that? That'd be great. That'd be helpful.
Delusional, and you are an enemy of the state.
Can we talk about how nationalists becoming the enemy of the state is a really weird vibe? Just really freaking strange.
Bill Maher, I think in his monologue, he represents exactly what is happening in our culture, probably started in academia, with the shifting in attitude toward Christians and the moniker.
So I like how he says, probably started in academia, because if there's one thing that I've learned from the conservative Christian base in the United States, it's that by and large, they are very anti-intellectual. Just this passing admission to me reads as the education bad kind of thing. That may not be what Todd is trying to say, but it wouldn't exactly ring untrue to me if that was actually what his opinion was, what he was trying to get across, or at least what he was trying to signal to his audience. I don't know what's in his heart of hearts, but that sounded weird to me.
Monikers are very important. The moniker that seems to be catching on is Christian nationalist, that it is automatically deemed to be a bad thing. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky for us. Today is today. Tomorrow, the definition might be a little different. Yesterday, it was different than today. Are you somebody who loves the country and is a Christian? You need to be aware that you could be branded, and I mean branded, a Christian nationalist, and that means you're delusional and dangerous.
Again, who? Like, you mentioned Bill Maher, but you haven't given an example. We're so far having to take everything you're saying at face value. And I have kind of a problem with that. Like, I mean, I understand this is a radio station. Maybe bringing up examples isn't exactly the easiest thing to do all the time, but a direct quote could help. Just a single direct quote could be helpful.
You will soon be an enemy of the state, which means that if this is the definition that we stick with in this culture, it means you might want to be very mindful about how you speak about these issues.
You haven't even given a definition, though. Wait. You said if this definition is what we use in this culture, but you haven't given an actual definition. You've just given a scope of people who potentially could have this. You've then said that the definition changes a bunch of times across culture, and then past this, when asked, or when I'm sitting here trying to figure out what you're meaning, you just say, if this is the definition we stick with. What definition, though? Did I miss it? Let me know in the comment section. Did I just miss that definition?
You might, at least at this moment, want to consider whether or not you allow yourself to be identified as a Christian nationalist. There's a reason that monikers are important. You're able to broad brush a huge group of people, label them negatively, and therefore brand them all as dangerous.
Isn't this a thing Christians do with non-believers all the time? The heathens, the Muslims, the pagans, the atheists. We're all these broad brushstroked evil people trying to dismantle Christianity from the inside out. He's not said that in so many words here, but it's a thing that I've noticed a lot. Like a very dangerous amount.
That's how you get rid of a dissenting opinion. And by the way, that is what liberalism, specifically socialism and Marxism, always does.
So wait a minute, hold on. So these broad brush categories are used to destroy dissenting opinions. I accept that premise, and then you proceed to give us 3 broad brush categories back to back. I can only wonder what the purpose is of using those broad brush categories, Todd. Are you bringing up these broad brush categories because you believe that these are truly enemies of, what, Christianity? Or do you know that your conservative audience hears liberalism, socialism, and Marxism, 1, believes them all to be somewhat approximately the same things, and 2, will accept all of that wholesale from you because they already want Marxism, socialism, liberalism. They already want these things to be their enemies. This is straight projection, Todd. That's what this is.
You will not find an instance of this in any civilization ever. They must identify particular people groups in order to silence their opposition.
Again, by pointing out that these are behaviors that Marxists, socialists, and liberalists all necessarily do, you are engaging in the exact same broad brush behavior. Moreover, not only are you hypocritically engaging in the broad brush behavior, but on top of that, you are using that to not provide any examples of what these are. Define Marxism for me, Todd. Define socialism. Define a liberal for me. I mean, I can do that with generally most of these things. You talk about liberalism, I'm going to think, okay, so we're talking about somebody who is socially very progressive, but monetarily is a little more conservative, so they tend to be okay with capitalism, and they tend to, now granted, these are tend tos, not all the time, but tend to be more okay with the status quo as it exists economically. They might be there for some economic reform in things like healthcare, but when you talk about more large things like the means of production, now you're having to move out of liberalism and move to a socialist. So we talk about socialism, and we talk about the proletariat owning the means of production. Then we talk about Marxism. We may be talking about somebody who believes in a dictatorship of the proletariat. You never know when they just give these broad brush stroke versions of these political ideologies without giving any definitions for these things. These are, like, I deal with people in most of these circles, so I'm okay defining them because I can ask people who are liberal or are socialist or are Marxist, I can ask them, hey, what are your political ideologies and how do they pertain to the person who you've taken the name and moniker from? Instead of doing that, people like Todd would rather build an argument based on your preconception of what these things are. So if you're in America, what's your preconception of a socialist? Probably the same as a communist. And if you're in Southern America, your preconception of a liberal is probably also the same preconception you have of a communist or a socialist, because we aren't really taught what these things are in the United States education system. We're taught that they're the enemy in various forms or fashions. But as for exactly what they are, not really. But Todd, do you have any wisdom for us? Any takeaways?
And so freedom of the press goes away, freedom of religion goes away, freedom of speech goes away. And
so wait, how do all those go away? I'm curious. I'm a socialist and I'm pro freedom of speech. I am pro freedom of religion. I mean, necessarily for me to be an atheist, I have to have a freedom of religion, because I have to be both free to practice a religion that I want and free not to. Freedom of religion comes with the positive and negative right there. What about me being a socialist means I want to take those things away? Again, Todd's not willing to engage in any definition games here. He's just going to throw the words out, assume his audience thinks that these are the enemy, and then give some things that the audience likely believes are things that are good to stand for, and then goes, aha, Marxists hate freedom of the press. Really? Really? I don't know many Marxists who do. I don't know any socialists who do. And I definitely don't know any liberals who do. But you can keep saying these things, pulling them out of your butt, but they don't get us anywhere in a conversation aside from recognizing that, well, you're a hack.
And how do you do that? You brand them as dangerous. You see, coming out of philosophies, and it's not just Marxism, you can go back to Rousseau and to Locke and to Hobbes, who would say that the autonomous self surrenders some of its liberties for safeties. And
that is generally a conversation, and the conversation about that is called the social contract. The social contract is an argument that says that when you engage in society, there is a balancing act between liberty and safety that everybody has to take. You can have a wholly safe society where nothing bad ever happens, but a society like that necessarily constrains everyone. You have no ability as a person in that society to move and function and do things in that like perfect world. But that's not really realistic. So we have to understand that there are liberties that people have to have. And then we also understand that when there are liberties, there are positive and negative liberties. And the conversation gets very muddled from that point forward when we start talking about positive and negative rights. So it's not that he's wrong here, but what really happens here is Todd demonstrates that he has at least a baseline understanding of these things, which means that when he chooses in conversation not to give us the whole context of these things during this radio show, my assumption has to be that you know the difference between a Marxist and a socialist and a liberal. You know what they do and don't stand for, and you know, I'm assuming you've read them now, you're referencing multiple people who I've had to read as well in the course of building this channel. I'm going to have to assume that by your deliberate either obfuscation or lack of showing the information at all, I'm going to have to assume that this is, in fact, a deliberate choice. This is something that you are doing because you have an audience that wants to hear a particular message, and so for you to deliver that message, there is certain information that has to be withheld. Talking about Karl Marx, if you're going to talk about gun rights, and then you want to bring up Karl Marx, I've engaged in the conversation with someone before where they have unironically said that Marx said that the state should take away all the guns. And I'm here to tell you right now, after reading the Communist Manifesto, that is not what he said. He specifically said that the proletariat should never allow themselves to be disarmed, because the state should not have undue power over the workers. But that's just an example, not necessarily one that Todd himself has brought up here, but one that I've dealt with over the course of my time here on YouTube.
we give the right to do that to the state. It's known as statism. The state protects us. The state keeps us safe at all costs. And so when the state has a certain set of values that they want to have protected and defended, they are willing to brand and label people who are dissenters, and historically, those people are silenced.
So this is Todd basically grabbing the conversation about what happened in, say, Nazi Germany and appropriating them for Christians here in the United States. This type of argument, this style of argument, the substance of it doesn't matter so much. It's the style. What is being accomplished here? Todd is trying to give a conversation that makes it seem as though Christians are victimized. Because not only does that work from the mindset of, and I've said it many times before, and we'll talk about it again, this is the same type of tactic that a fascist used. I'm not trying to say that Todd is a fascist. I'm not saying he's engaging in that kind of conversation and being pro-fascist, but what I am saying is they use this tactic as well, this tactic of self-victimization. It works conveniently well for the Christian narrative, though, because when you have a Christian who engages in this kind of conversation, the persecution of the Christian soul is already built into the narrative of Christianity. The idea that you will be tortured, you will be ridiculed, you will be shunned, you will be ostracized, all of these horrible things happening to people, happening to individuals, are part of Christian theology. They are part of the mythos. Peter getting crucified upside down, Jesus getting crucified for speaking the truth, people being forced to eat food that had been offered to gods they did not believe in, and instead having to eat vegetables and fight on a different diet than everybody else because they needed to be different as they were representatives of God. People being forced into slavery or walking the wilderness for 40 years because of one man's mistake. This persecution is baked so heavily into the narrative of Christianity that it is so easy for someone like Todd to prey on that by giving examples that make it seem like a state, in the way that the Jehovah's Witnesses try to do, that the state is going to come down and attack you for your deeply held conservative Christian values. This is a thing that, because it is so baked into Christianity, people like Todd can take advantage of. And I hate it because I have friends who are Christian who are uniquely susceptible to this kind of persecution narrative, because there are some Christians where I live who believe that if you are not being persecuted actively, you are not doing right by Jesus. And it's a very, very strange mentality, but it exists, and it's weird, and it's so hard to combat. Because when you combat them, they can then hide behind the defense of you're persecuting them. We're going to continue with Todd, but I wanted to go off on that tangent because what's happening here is fairly sinister, and it does paint a lot of people who do fall into these caveats of Christianity as almost victims of people like Todd, who know that their audience will respond to particular narratives.
In varying forms, they are silenced. That has happened in every single nation that veers toward socialism or Marxism or really just liberalism.
So according to Todd, a state going towards liberalism will necessarily lead to the silencing of good American Christian voices. This type of rhetoric means that somebody would have to, if they are a Christian and they do not want to be silenced, and they necessarily can't be silenced because part of the Christian narrative is spreading the word of God, then this necessarily means that for a Christian to be a good Christian, they must also align themselves with conservatism. As toxic as conservative ideologies can be, and as fallacious as they are in many cases, especially when we have arguments from tradition, you only leave the door open for them to engage in that one ideology. And since America is a majority Christian nation, this ultimately only has one goal, create as many conservative voters as possible and maintain the control for conservative voices there.
Far left liberalism. It's the playbook. And my fear is...
He says it's the playbook. But notice what he doesn't do. He's willing to name authors. He's willing to name Marx, Locke, Hobbes. He's willing to do these things, but he's not willing to quote. He's willing to talk about Bill Maher and what Bill Maher is saying on this, but he's not willing to say what Bill Maher has said. He's constructing a fantasy. I sincerely hope that everybody here can recognize what's going on. Todd is deliberately constructing a fantasy. He has built up fake axioms, and his argument, the world that he is shaping for his people to suffer in, is necessarily built on layers and layers of fantasy. And I'm not talking about Christianity as fantasy. We can accept that Christianity is wholly and totally true and his God is real and everything, and he's still creating a fantasy world here.
That is what we are hearing today, courtesy of Bill Maher, talking about the mass delusion of America known as Christianity, specifically evangelical religion.
So we should probably point out that evangelical Christianity is uniquely problematic in America in how it ends up fighting against progressivism. But it looks like he might actually get into the conversation about Bill Maher, so let's let him continue.
And he is using the events of January 6th to say all of those people there, they were all evangelical. Look, the details are irrelevant.
Did he say they're all evangelical? And are the details irrelevant? Wait. I'm interested to see the quote, but if he even brings it up. But the idea that everybody there is necessarily evangelical, I'm willing to bet a majority of them were, but I don't think that somebody would be as sloppy to say they're all evangelical Christians without taking like so much as a census. That's hard for me to believe. Now, I believe that Todd believes that his audience will buy this, but we don't have to.
Because right now you might be saying, well, wait a second, there were people from Antifa. Doesn't matter. Hey, there were people there from Black Lives. Most of the people were peaceful. Doesn't matter. That does not matter. What matters in the social narrative is how you get branded and labeled. I'm not saying you don't try to present the truth. What I am suggesting is the truth.
I do like how when he brings up the Antifa stuff and then says, I'm not saying you don't try to fight for the truth, there's kind of a subtle, there's a very subtle push there, if anybody else is catching it, as to what he believes the truth of what January 6th is. It's very subtle. It's a throwaway statement. But there's almost an admission there, and it's kind of telling.
Side, you, as an evangelical Christian, are the same people who went into the Capitol and wreaked havoc. That's you. And you're now a Christian nationalist. And so if you aren't mindful of this, you might, in conversations, be saying things that are completely innocuous, but people hear it and go, you are a Christian nationalist. Therefore, you're dangerous.
What innocuous things, though? Like, I'm curious if he's going to say, you're going to say things that are completely innocuous in conversation. Maybe giving us some examples of those things could be helpful.
That's what Bill Maher thinks.
By Oskar Schindler.
Oh, he's actually going to play it.
But space lasers from Jews? Please, magical religious thinking is a virus, and QAnon is just its current mutation.
This, by the way, is his treatment of the book of Revelation. It's wacky. It's zany.
I mean, it is. Explain to me how the world getting drenched in blood by a bunch of trumpets and locks on books is not wacky nonsense. Please, just make it make sense to me. Now, the stuff that he's pointing out is wacky nonsense here. He mentions the Jewish space lasers. This is the conspiracy theory that was touted by Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's the person who he's referencing there. you have to pivot to the Revelation stuff, because otherwise this sounds nightmarishly embarrassing. You have to pivot away, because if you take just what Bill Maher is saying here, what he's saying is perfectly reasonable. He didn't say being religious is a virus. He pointed out that religious magical thinking is the issue. Now, what is religious magical thinking? This is superstition, basically. If you want a good conversation where this is concerned, I would highly suggest looking up Ocean Keltoy's video on superstition, and it provides a very good philosophical dividing line between religiosity and superstition, which can lead to delusion, which can lead to what we would call magical thinking. This is a very reasonable stance to take, and the only way to misconstrue it as unreasonable is to pivot. Todd here is pivoting from the conversation about magical thinking to he thinks that your book is wrong. He thinks that Revelations is wrong, guys. Even though that didn't factor into the conversation that was being had right here. But let's continue.
And you and I are now a part of QAnon too. Whether you believe in any conspiracy theory or not, you're a part of QAnon.
That's not what he said, though. We can even play back what he said.
Its current mutation. Magical religious thinking is a virus, and QAnon is just its current mutation.
So if we accept this, and if we accept this analogy wholesale, we have magical religious thinking, which would be superstition bred from religion first. Not all religions necessarily have this problem, but let's go ahead and take the argument as is. We have magical thinking bred from superstition, and that kind of mindset, the mindset that gets you on that playing field, can be utilized to get somebody into a conspiracy theory like QAnon. That's not an unreasonable take. That's entirely reasonable, and you know what? We even have an example of why Todd would recognize that it's reasonable in this video. Remember what I talked about with persecution complex narratives? And the fact that Todd is using the persecution complex of his audience in order to engage in confirmation bias for them. This exact same type of understanding of thought patterns is being employed by Todd. He knows that his people generally will respond to this particular type of rhetoric, so he's going to engage in that type of rhetoric. Bill Maher knows that a particular type of thinking leads to someone being more susceptible to conspiracy theories. Therefore, it makes sense to associate the conspiracy theories with them. But please note that this is a nested hierarchy. This does not mean that all religious people are QAnoners, but it does mean that most QAnoners are religious.
This, by the way, is his treatment of the book of Revelation. It's wacky, it's zany, and you and I are now a part of QAnon too. Whether you believe in any conspiracy theory or not, you're a part of QAnon. Listen to the way you are being described.
Also notice before Bill Maher continues, notice that he's having to frame it this way for his audience. This is called poisoning the well. What he's doing right now is a fallacy called poisoning the well, where you are pre-priming your audience for information that can be construed completely differently. Now, it's not necessarily poisoning the well if you are entirely right. But if you are deliberately, much like with a straw man fallacy, if you are deliberately trying to misrepresent and obfuscate, you have engaged in the fallacy.
That's why megachurches play QAnon videos. It's the same basic plot. Q is a prophet, Trump is the Messiah. There's an apocalyptic event looming, the storm. There's a titanic struggle of good versus evil, and if you want good to win, just keep those checks coming in.
By the way, that is actually an accurate analysis of every worldview. It does have a creation story. It has a false story.
Wait, every worldview? Every worldview? No. Every worldview does not have a creation story and a fall story and etc. But if we were to accept that they did, we would also be accepting that Christianity is not unique in this respect, and if there's nothing unique in the narrative of Christianity, then why would we stick with that particular narrative?
It has a redemption story, it has a judgment story, and it has a paradise story. All of them.
Every worldview has a paradise story? Everyone does. I don't think he's actually studied enough worldviews to make that assumption.
Including socialism and Marxism. So
Marxism and socialism have a fall and redemption and arc and... What?
Social justice theory, you name it. So his observation is accurate in that it is the framework for every single worldview, but he's applying it to evangelical Christians. Who else has mega churches?
We need to stop pretending there's no way we'll ever understand why the Trump mob believes in him. It's because they're religious.
Boom. That's you. No, that's not where I fit. That's not where I fit. You fit there if that's where you're being fitted.
They've already made space in their heads for that doesn't make sense.
He's talking about evangelical Christianity. We're the delusional ones.
Okay, so let's go ahead and take the argument at face value, Todd. If you have already made a space in your head for talking snakes, if you've already made a space in your head for a God who is all good and yet also created hell, these are not observations based in reality. These are observations based in fiction. And they are not properly compartmentalized the way that proper fiction is. So wait. It makes sense that you'd have to keep on reframing he thinks you're silly. But if you actually listen to what has been said there, his argument is not all Christians are QAnoners. His argument is that Christians are uniquely primed for conspiratorial thinking and therefore for things like QAnon. That's what's being argued here. He's not arguing that all Christians fall into this category. He's arguing that Christians are uniquely susceptible to it. That's not the same thing. Consider this for a moment. I'll go ahead and engage in some introspection for a second. I, as a socialist, am uniquely susceptible to issues of workers' rights. I consider artwork to be work. I consider somebody making a drawing to be work. When Rimixen built my avatar, that is work. When YaraKoro built my background, my desk, that is work. When JacandQuil works on my Patron slides, that is work. As a socialist, I am in the unique position, just as Christians are in a unique position, to where arguments about workers' rights are things that I will respond to in a certain way. So, for instance, when I see that an artist is being mistreated on Twitter, when somebody screws with them, where a commission is concerned, decides not to give them money, decides to yell at them for their pricing, what have you, I have a tendency, and people who follow me on Twitter can they can attest, I've done this. I will see that, and then I will ask that artist if their DMs are open, and I will commission them out of spite. I am angry at the shit that some random dipshit on the internet did to some random artist who's doing their best. So I, as a socialist who cares about workers' rights, am now uniquely susceptible to a level of spite that will make me commission people for work. There's nothing special about being uniquely susceptible to certain narratives. For me, workers' rights, things where atheism is concerned, these are things where I'm going to be uniquely susceptible because of my worldview, because of where I am. Christians, especially evangelical Christians in the United States, are uniquely susceptible to things like anti-vax, are uniquely susceptible to things like conspiratorial thinking, are uniquely susceptible to things like abstinence-only education advocacy. There's nothing special about that. That's just an observation in reality.
When you're a QAnon fanatic, you're also a fundamentalist Christian. They just go together like macaroni and cheese or Chardonnay and Valium. Just me? Okay.
Perhaps, but That broad brush approach, like it or not, that's you, evangelical.
Okay, so again, it was made very clear earlier in the video that this is a hierarchical system. This is a nested hierarchy. You first have evangelicals at the top or heart of the hierarchy, and those evangelicals are more likely to be QAnoners. It doesn't say that all QAnoners are evangelicals. Now, granted, I could always take the coward's approach out, point out that Bill Maher is a comedian, and in so doing, just go, he's just making jokes. I'm not going to do that, though, because I think people who engage in that kind of conversation are taking the easy way out, and we're not going to take the easy way out. This does not necessarily apply to you if you're a Christian. That's not the argument. That if we were to take what he's saying as a syllogistic, informal argument, that's not the conclusion that you get to. You don't get to the conclusion. Now, yes, it is a bit of a broad brushstroke generalization, though. That is true. I agree with that. There's a level of nuance not in that conversation, likely because that is a conversation happening for comedy's sake. And brevity is the nature of comedy. You got to be fast, you've got to be quippy, you've got to do, well, basically the things that I don't do. I'm not funny. That's what you do with comedy. But we can treat it like a philosophical argument, as we did during this video. We can.
You believe in every QAnon theory. You would like to burn down the Capitol. You're fine with the Capitol being rushed and mobbed. You're fine with all of that.
That's not what he said, though, Todd. And we all heard the audio. You got to cherry pick the audio. You got to pick the best part for your argument. And it didn't say what you said it said. I'm beginning to think that Todd Friel is in the same category of people as Ben Shapiro, where we should just never take them seriously.
Because you're being labeled a Christian nationalist.
That insurrection looked like a revival meeting with people praying around wooden crosses, waving the Christian flag and Jesus saves signs, yelling, Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president. A Jesus 2020 banner hung near the gallows that was erected for Mike Pence.
I know what you're thinking. I didn't do that. Well, you did, because now you're getting branded as a part of the gang.
No, that's not what happened here. He's literally pointing out that there were people there who engaged in that conversation, and the early parts of the conversation that you ignored were where he framed this as a nested hierarchy. Todd, you're a very dishonest person. I know that the Bible doesn't say not to lie. When we talk about that particular commandment in the Bible, it's actually about bearing false witness against your neighbor in a court of law. So I know the Bible doesn't say not to lie. But Jesus, man, maybe consider not doing that. It could be helpful. I know it would be very bad for your career for you to stop lying. That would be a very awkward thing to happen to you. But maybe it would be a good idea to give it a shot anyway. You know, for longevity. You can probably be seen as more reasonable over time if you weren't constantly lying to your audience. Maybe, just maybe. But I think that's as far as we're going to get into the video. I don't think there's much more we can really gain from here, and we've already repeated a few points a handful of times already. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. I want to know what you think where this is all concerned, because where I'm sitting, this seems like audience manipulation, and it doesn't ring very well to me. But if you are watching, then I highly suggest go ahead and hop into the description of this video and click the link that will lead you to my Twitch channel. I'm doing more streams over there lately, and I would love to have you over there as a follower. I will be doing a lot of stuff over there, especially a 24-hour stream, which, depending on when this video comes out, may or may not already have happened. Who knows? I have no way of knowing until the video is out. But with that said, please go follow me over on Twitch. And in the meantime, go ahead and like the video if you haven't already. Please consider becoming a patron and subscriber. And as always, everyone,
never look a tulip in the eye.
I mean, that too, but also, thank you very much for watching the video. And as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.